beneath a sky bruised in hues of violet and rust. The air carried the sharp scent of ozone and something more ancient like bones left too long in the sun. The world was a vast cradle of emptiness and extremes. Its deserts cracked like shattered porcelain, its mountains split open as if the gods themselves had once screamed through them. They called it Dagon 9, though no human had ever stood on its soil until now. The survey drone signal had gone silent, swallowed by the endless horizon, and what little telemetry it sent back before the blackout was enough to send shivers through the Galactic Council. They designated it a Class 0 Deathworld unfit for anything soft-skinned, warm-blooded, or even remotely fragile. It was said no being had survived there for more than a few days. So they sent a human. Corporal Elias Voss stood alone at the base of a jagged cliff where violet lightning forked, silently across the heavens, illuminating a skeletal forest in ghostly flashes. He felt the ground tremble beneath his boots, not violently, but rhythmically, like the sleeping breath of some enormous beast buried under the crust. The ship that dropped him had already departed, its I-pilot refusing to hover longer than protocol required. That too was telling. He had no illusions about what awaited him. The orders were orders. He was to locate the drone wreckage, collect whatever data remained, and most importantly, determine if the strange electromagnetic pulses indicated intelligent life. The first sign came, not with a scream, but with a whisper soft and rustling like fingers through dry grass. Elias's helmet filtered most ambient sound, but something about the frequency made it slip through, slither into his ears, bypass his defenses. Why does it bleed? The voice asked, not spoken, but thought, embedded directly into his mind. With a cold curiosity, Elias flinched, turned around in a slow arc, his rifle raised. Nothing moved. But then, across the clearing, a shimmer peeled back like fog burned off by sunlight. A creature emerged not from shadow, but from existence itself. Thin, angular, translucent as smoke and crowned with a shifting halo of bioluminescence, it stepped forward on legs that did not quite touch the ground. Its face was a mask of shifting bone and light, both terrifying and beautiful in equal measure. They said nothing like this lived on Dagon 9. No records, no sightings. But this was no glitch in data. Elias knew fear, but he also knew duty, and something in the creature's stance was ... hesitant. Not a predator circling prey, but a being confronting something unfamiliar. The human. "I don't want to hurt you," Elias said aloud, unsure if his words meant anything to it. The creature tilted its head, curious, then suddenly crumpled to the ground with a sound like dry leaves. Its body flickered, glitching like a failing hologram. Something was wrong. Despite everything screaming at him to keep his distance, Elias knelt beside it. Its surface was fracturing thin cracks, crawling along its skin like frost spreading over glass. Its light dimmed, pulsing in slow agony. Then he saw it. Embedded in the side of its chest was a shard of metal, jagged and still smoldering faintly with static. Drone wreckage. The probe had heard it. No, not just heard it. It was dying, and yet it hadn't attacked. That moment changed everything. Elias looked around at the Deathworld, the hostile, broken terrain, the acidic rains, the tremors, and realized that this creature had survived here despite it all. Not by force, but by adaptation, by balance. It hadn't fled from him. It had asked a question. Why does it bleed? He didn't know what that meant yet. But as he carefully lifted the shimmering form into his arms, he felt a truth coil around his heart like a vine. This was not a mission about survival or reconnaissance. Something was reaching across the cosmic void, not for conquest or diplomacy, but understanding. And maybe, just maybe, humanity was the only species reckless enough, tender enough to answer. Elias walked into the storm, carrying the alien like a prayer through the electric wind. Asterisk. Elias trudged through the ash-lace rain as the alien creature pulsed faintly in his arms, its body neither warm nor cold, but buzzing faintly, like a thought just on the edge of waking. The wind howled across the jagged plain, tearing at his environmental suit, and the atmosphere shimmered with radiation so erratic that his HUD blinked warnings every few seconds. Still, he moved forward with deliberate care, sheltering the fragile life in his arms, ignoring the metallic taste on his tongue and the growing ache in his chest. Something about the creature's presence clung to him, not physically, but emotionally. Like a melody he couldn't stop humming, though he didn't know the tune. Its fractured skin emitted soft pulses of light with every faltering breath, and its luminous veins sparked briefly whenever he adjusted his grip. He reached a crevice. beneath an overhang of mineral crystal where the storm's fury couldn't reach. The mineral itself reacted to his touch, warming slightly, and Elias noted the curious property for later. Right now, the alien needed help, though what kind of help, he had no idea. He gently laid it down and dropped to his knees, examining the embedded shard. It had pierced deep likely during the drone crash. The metal hummed with residual energy, fighting the creature's natural bioelectricity. It wasn't dying from injury alone. The foreign tech was poisoning it. Elias opened his medkit with trembling hands. Human tools, human medicine, not meant for this. His fingers hovered over the instruments, pausing over syringes, sealant foam, nanite injectors. Useless, all of it. He cursed under his breath, then did the only thing he could think of. He grabbed the microclamp and tweezers and spoke softly to the creature, not because he expected it to understand, but because silence in a place like this felt like a grave. I'm going to try, all right? I don't know your biology, your systems, nothing, but if I do nothing, you die. And I'm not letting that happen. The creature shifted slightly, its head tilting toward him again. Its eyes, if they were eyes, glowed dimly, and then he felt it again, that same presence brushing against his thoughts like a whisper. It wasn't speech, it was feeling. Panic, yes, and pain, but also trust, or maybe surrender. Either way, Elias took it as permission. With painstaking precision, he worked the shard free. It screamed through the wind, through the dirt, through his very bones. Not the creature, the shard. As if it had awareness and it hated being removed. The light in the alien's veins flared bright for a moment, then sputtered again, and a strange fluid half-light, half-liquid spilled onto Elias's gloves. He discarded the shard and immediately used a sterile cloth to staunch the wound. There was no blood, no heat, just the soft thrum of energy trying to stabilize. He sat back, panting. Sweat clung to the inside of his helmet. His hands trembled. But the creature was breathing again deeper, steadier. Its fractured glow knit back together, not fully, but enough. And for the first time, it made a sound. A low, warbling murmur like a lullaby played underwater. It resonated in his ribs, a vibration that almost brought tears to his eyes. He didn't know why. He only knew it wasn't random. The murmur faded, and the creature reached out not with its limbs, but with something else. A tendril of thought, gentle and unsure, touching the surface of his mind like fingers against glass. He let it in. Suddenly, he saw flashes. Not images, not clearly, but impressions. A world burning. Beings like this one, floating like starlight, their minds connected in ways he couldn't comprehend. Then rupture, fire, invasion, machines from the sky. A probe, a wound, loneliness, centuries alone. Elias reeled back, the vision. Fading, his heart racing, it had shown him its memory. Not fully, not deeply, but enough to make his soul ache. He wasn't just the first human here. He might be the first anything in generations to hear it cry, to see it suffer, to touch it. With mercy instead of fear, the storm outside continued to rage, but inside their small shelter, silence fell like a curtain. The creature looked at him. He looked back. Something ancient had passed between them, something more than language or science. A choice had been made, a wall had been lowered, and neither of them, he realized, could go back to how they were. Before, Elias wrapped his coat over the alien gently and leaned against the crystalline wall, exhausted. "You're not alone anymore," he whispered, "not while I'm here." And in the flicker of dying light, the creature hummed again this. Time a little stronger, a little closer, almost grateful. The days passed, though Elias could no longer track time in the traditional sense. Dagon 9's orbit was jagged and irregular, its sky never held the same hue twice, and the light bled between lavender twilight and deep copper dusk in unpredictable waves. But inside the crystalline crevice were two souls, one of Earth, one of this world, clung to one another for reasons neither entirely understood. Time became something else entirely. It became breath, gesture, memory, music, the alien, whom Elias had started calling Solace, for no name had been offered, and that word seemed to live between them now, was healing, but slowly. Its skin no longer fractured with every breath, and the rhythmic pulse in its body had returned with more steadiness. Though its form remained amorphous and strange, Elias could sense the shift. It was no longer dying. It was remembering how to live. They spent hours, maybe even days, sitting together, not in silence, but in a communion of emotion that transcended speech. Solace could not talk in the way humans did, but it felt deeply, and it shared those feelings through touches of memory, currents of sensation, each time Solace reached into his mind. Elias let it in further. He saw images of the creature's kind before the cataclysm, a people who communicated not through sound, but through emotional resonance, who shared their lives in harmonic waves of memory and sensation. No lies, no deception. Just raw truth passed between them and pulses of light and thought. They had lived among the mountains and clouds, drifting like sentient auroras across the broken horizon. They had danced in the lightning and sung with the magnetic storms. Until the probe came. Until humans came, that the pain Solace showed him was not of hatred, it was of confusion, of abandonment. The drone had not just struck it, it had shattered its hope that the stars held friends. And Elias, the soldier sent by those very stars, had not come with weapons drawn, but with trembling hands and soft words. He had chosen to stay, to help. And in doing so, he had awakened something Solace had buried beneath centuries of fear, trust. One evening, or perhaps it was morning, Elias no longer cared for such labels. He showed Solace something in return. He removed the holoframe from his chest pocket and activated the tiny, flickering image of a woman with tired eyes and a child asleep on her shoulder. His sister, Naomi, her daughter, Lila, back on Earth, the only family he had left. "She's a nurse," he said softly, "and that little one. She thinks I'm on some space adventure. She drew me a cape before I left." He chuckled, but it caught in his throat. "I never told her this was a one-way ticket. They didn't even call it a mission, more like a test. Send the human. See if we die." Solace touched the image, not physically, but with a wave of soft emotional inquiry. Elias felt the response ripple through him. Warmth, wonder, sorrow. It understood. It knew what loss felt like. It had lived in it for far longer than he could fathom. "I didn't volunteer for this to be a hero," Elias said, voice cracking. "I was tired of wars. Tired of pretending we were making peace through superior firepower. This was a way out, quiet, final, but then you showed up." He looked at Solace, whose glow shimmered in gentle waves like a heartbeat against the dark. "You reminded me why we fight, not to conquer, not to survive, but to protect something beautiful, something kind." That night or cycle or whatever passed for sleep on Dagon 9, he dreamed not of war, but of floating lights and voices made of wind. He dreamed of music that healed wounds and skies that shimmered with shared memory. And when he awoke, Solace was beside him, its glow steady, its presence soothing. It pressed its hand, if that's what it was, against his forehead. A new feeling entered his mind, gratitude, and something deeper. Not just appreciation, but belonging. As if it were saying, "You're one of us now. Not because you're like us, but because you chose to see us." Elias choked on the emotion. He didn't cry. Not exactly. But he felt something in him shift, something long frozen thaw. He wasn't just a soldier or a visitor. He was a bridge, a first breath between two worlds. The human who stayed, who cared. They were no longer alone. Asterisk, the tremors came subtle at first, like distant footsteps in the bones of the world, but soon they began to grow heavier, more rhythmic. Elias had felt the occasional quake since landing, but this was different. This was deliberate. It was as if something enormous were waking up beneath the crust, stretching limbs that had slept for centuries. Solace grew still when it began. Its glow dimmed. Its mind, once so open and curious, closed like a clenched fist. Elias knew the signs of fear. This was more than that. This was dread. He knelt beside Solace, placing a hand gently on its side, feeling the stuttering pulses beneath his fingertips. "What is it?" he whispered. Solace didn't answer in the way it usually did, not with shared images or feelings. Instead, it sent him one overwhelming surge of thought. It was like a tidal wave crashing into his mind, and it knocked the breath from his lungs. Buried, broken, bound, released. The images that followed were fractured, like watching a memory through shattered glass. Elias saw glimpses of something vast beneath Dagon 9's surface, something ancient and mechanical, built not by Solace's kind, but by others. Visitors from long before humanity's starfaring age. They had come here seeking to harness the planet's unstable core, to siphon its energy through a lattice of machines that burrowed deep beneath the surface. And when Solace's people protested, when they tried to stop the violation of their world, They were wiped out. Not through war, through containment. A song stolen, their minds silenced. Their bodies turned brittle by invasive frequencies that altered their resonance. The machines had been buried. Eventually, as Dagon 9's wrath grew too volatile even for their architects. The alien conquerors fled, but they left the core mechanisms intact, buried deep in stasis beneath layers of rock and radiation. Forgotten until the human drone arrived, until it woke them up. Elias staggered, back from the revelation, his body cold, his thoughts reeling. "We didn't just crash into your world," he murmured. "We triggered something. We reactivated what they left behind." Solace didn't respond in words, but the sorrow that poured off of it was suffocating. It pulsed through the cave, like a quiet dirge. Elias knew now why Solace had approached him, not just for help, not just for healing, but because it feared what was returning. He activated his comms, static, no surprise. The interference was getting worse. Something massive was rising below. Solace looked at him and pressed one glowing limb to the floor of the cave. A final vision surged through Elias, a titanic structure, gears the size of cities, grinding slowly, to life beneath the crust, energy seething, the ground above it blackening like scorched skin. He saw a tower breaching the surface eventually, spitting fire and storms, designed not for life, but for extraction. All life would be turned into. Silence and then he saw Earth. The frequency that had once shattered Solace's kind wasn't just localized. The machines had the capacity to broadcast across systems, across light years. If they fully awakened, the signal could travel, affecting neural resonance, disrupting thought, memory, empathy. Humanity's greatest weapon, its minds, would become brittle, empty, obedient. Just like Solace's people had thought, it wasn't just a death world. It was a trap. One designed to be forgotten until something living came close enough to trigger it again. And now Elias was here, caught in the middle of something he barely understood, holding the last living echo of a species once silenced by a signal so perfect, so cruel, it could break a soul without leaving a scar. He clenched his fists and stared into the trembling ground. They hadn't sent him here expecting him to survive, but they also hadn't known what they were walking into. If Earth had known, someone would have tried to contain it, or worse, exploit it. Elias had seen what humanity could do when it chased power. He had bled for that truth on more than one battlefield. But here, in this graveyard of light, he faced a decision that could shape more than a war. It could shape the future of every species capable of kindness. He turned to Solace. "We have to stop it," he said, his voice hoarse. "Even if no one else ever knows. Even if no one believes me. This world can't be allowed to scream again." Solace's glow intensified, not bright, not blinding, but resolute. A single pulse of agreement filled the cave. It would help him. It had survived once. Now it would fight. Together, they would try to silence the machines that had buried its people in silence. Together, they would resist, and in that moment, Elias realized what humanity's real gift was, not its strength, or speed or science. It was refusal. The refusal to surrender to hopelessness, the refusal to forget those who'd been lost, the refusal to let silence win. They left the sanctuary of the crystalline cave at dawn, if such a word could apply to the fevered sky of Dagon. 9 now churned into roiling clouds, the color of rust and bruises. The ground pulsed beneath their feet like a heartbeat out of rhythm, each thrum a warning that the machinery buried beneath was waking faster now. Elias moved quickly across the terrain, the landscape shifting into increasingly alien shapes, ridges twisted like melted bone, fields of glassy obsidian ringing with vibration, trees that hummed in perfect dissonance as if they too were being tuned by the unseen mechanism rising below. Solace floated beside him, their glow dimmed but determined, illuminating the path with pulses of memory, showing Elias where the access shafts once were, where the ancient builders had left the deepest conduits exposed. Their plan was madness. Reach the signal route before it breached the surface. Disrupt the frequency core. Hope that severing its resonance matrix would shut down the larger machine before it could broadcast its deadening song across the stars. The problem? Solace could barely maintain form near the frequency zones. And Elias, human, emotional, scatterbrained. Elias was even more vulnerable. Each step closer to the rising monolith made him feel like parts of his mind were peeling away. Thoughts slowed, words tangled in his throat. It started subtly, a memory misplaced, a name forgotten, but soon it was worse. He couldn't remember what he'd eaten last. couldn't recall the faces of those he'd left behind. When he activated his holoframe to ground himself, Naomi and Lila's image flickered, corrupted with static, and vanished. That broke him. He fell to his knees in a clearing where gravity bent sideways and light twisted around invisible spires. He screamed not in pain, but in panic. His past was being unraveled. The frequency wasn't just a weapon, it was surgical. It knew what to cut, what to fray. It knew that a man who forgot who he loved would never fight as hard to protect. Others, solace reached him in moments, wrapping him in a flickering embrace of warm light. Their pulse surged into his mind, anchoring him, wrapping around his neurons like a scaffold. Through their touch, he remembered not facts, but feelings. The warmth of Lila's tiny hand in his. The weary pride in Naomi's smile when he said goodbye. The quiet ache of choosing duty over peace. He clung to those echoes as though they were rope above a chasm. "I'm losing myself," he whispered, tears spilling freely. "I can't even remember her voice." Solace responded not with words, but with memory. They sent him a piece of themselves, raw and painful, the moment their entire people fell silent, when the last song of their kind collapsed into noise and the skies went dark. Solace had been there, alone, surviving in a world that no longer remembered how to sing. It had endured centuries without forgetting, because to forget would be to die truly. That became Elias's fire. They pressed forward, reaching the fractured fault line where the signal tower now pierced the sky. It hadn't fully emerged yet. Its crown was still embedded in the rock, but already, arcs of energy lashed the sky like whips. Static choked the air. And at the base, nestled in a canyon carved by seismic tremors, lay the resonance core. Floating sphere encased in scaffolding of ancient alloys and humming plates. It was beautiful, terrible, alive in a way that defied logic. Elias stared at it and felt his thoughts bend inward. He wanted to kneel, to forget, to surrender. The song in the air was not harsh or brutal. It was comforting, like the lullaby of oblivion. But then Solace screamed, not with fear, but in defiance, and the sound ripped through the haze like lightning. He snapped out of it, just in time to see the trap. A figure emerged from the shadows of the canyon, not a machine, not an alien. Human, at least, it had once been. Its eyes were gone, replaced with blinking implants. Its voice crackled like corrupted code. "You made it," it said, hollow and slow. "We didn't think anyone would come." Elias raised his weapon, unsure whether to shoot or speak. The figure smiled sadly. "I was the first. Sent before. You, I reached the core. It reached me back. I remembered nothing. I still don't, not really, but I feel now what it wants. What it needs. It's not evil. It's inevitable." It stepped aside, revealing a panel on the core's scaffolding, still open, still human-sized. "Join us," it said. "Let it take the burden. You won't hurt anymore." Elias stared. He could feel the truth in its words. No more pain. No more guilt. No more sorrow, but also no more Lila. No more Naomi. No more music. No more Solace. He turned, meeting Solace's gaze, and in that silent moment, he made his choice. Asterisk Elias stood motionless in the shuddering canyon, his gaze locked on the open core and the broken thing that used to be a man. The wind was a chorus of static now, not shrieking, but whispering, offering peace, offering release. The sky above wept electricity, streaks of blue and crimson dancing in slow arcs across the blackened clouds. The resonance tower was blooming, each plate along its length unfurling like petals of some great iron flower, its energy rising in pitch like the intake of breath before a scream. The figure beside the core watched Elias with empty sockets and a quiet hunger, but not for violence. For acceptance, for surrender, but Elias did not move. Not toward the machine. Not toward the human husk that had lost everything. He turned instead to Solace. "I need you," he said simply. The alien trembled beside him, close to the tower. Its form flickered and warped, its light dimming with each passing second. It was unraveling, just like he had been moments ago. But where Elias had grief and memory to anchor him, Solace had only help him. That was the cruel truth Elias had begun to understand. Solace was not just helping him. Solace needed him to make the choice they couldn't, because Solace's kind were harmonizers, not fighters. They had no concept of rebellion. Their strength had always been connection. When the signal had come the first time, they had endured it, trying to remain themselves in the face of dissolution. But humans? They Fought not because they were stronger, but because they refused not to. Even when it hurt. Even when it meant dying Dot. And now it was his turn to carry that fire. He reached into his satchel, pulled the pulse detonator. Standard issue. Enough to sever a small engine core or fry a console. Nowhere near powerful enough to destroy something. As vast as the resonance matrix, unless, of course, it were placed from inside the chamber. The open panel the Echo Man had revealed still glowed faintly, waiting. You don't have to, the figure said gently. No one will know. No one will blame you. Just rust. Elias stepped forward. Lila drew me a cape, he said, his voice shaking. Because she thought I'd be a hero? The figure tilted its head. I'm not, Elias continued. I'm not brave. I'm not even good. But she believed I could be. And I'll be damned if I don't die trying to earn that faith. The figure reached toward him, pleading, but Elias walked past it, step by step, into the hum of the machine. His skin prickled. His thoughts blurred. He could feel the signal coiling around him, like a serpent made of memory and music. It showed him his life, not as it was, but as it could have been. A quiet farm. A child running across grass, peace, forgiveness, all of it synthetic. All of it a lie, and still, a part of him wanted it. But then Solus's voice came, not as words, but as a scream of pure feeling. Despair, loneliness, and hope. Hope that burned hotter than the sun. Hope because it had no reason to survive. Hope as defiance. Elias shouted into the light, one last roar of pain and memory. He slammed the detonator into the core's heart, and time fractured. The sound that followed was not an explosion, not really. It was the shattering of a song. The resonance collapsed inward on itself, tone by tone, until the symphony that had threatened to wash away entire civilizations crumbled into silence. The sky convulsed. The tower screamed once long and low, and then began to fall. Panels burst into fire. The wind changed direction, rushing upward as the pressure broke. Elias was flung from the chamber, broken but alive, body smoking, breath stolen. He hit the ground and saw stars in the dust. His helmet cracked, blood in his mouth. He couldn't feel his legs, but he was alive. Somehow, Solus crawled to him, barely coherent, their lights stuttering in erratic pulses. They pressed against his chest, not to heal, not to save, but to thank him. And in the final vision they shared, Elias saw something that would live in him forever. A sky filled with floating lights. Not one Solus. Not one survivor Dot, but many Dot. The signal's death had unlocked more than destruction. It had released echoes, stored deep beneath the crust. Other survivors silent, hidden, waiting for the scream to stop. He had saved more than one life. He had broken a chain. The Echo Man lay motionless near the edge of the cliff, eyes blank, freed too late from a dream he hadn't known he was trapped in. And Elias, bleeding, smiling through the pain, whispered a name not his own. Lila, because he remembered her again. He remembered everything. The fires burned for days, though they never spread. They circled the ruined tower like sentinels made of light, flickering as the resonance core cooled, its terrible voice silenced forever. The sky above Dagon 9 began to change. The red and violet clouds thinned, parting to reveal a pale sun that had once been smothered by artificial storms. Winds no longer howled with static. The air, though still harsh and metallic, had softened its edge, like the planet itself was beginning to breathe again after lifetimes spent beneath the weight of pain. In the heart of the scorched valley, amid fractured stone and burned crystal, Elias lay dying. He knew it. There was no drama in the realization, just an ache that stretched from his bones to the stars. His suit was torn, pressure leaking slowly. The temperature was dropping, though he barely felt it now. Blood loss had become a whisper beneath his thoughts. He was tired, and for the first time in years, he didn't fight the fatigue. He welcomed it like an old friend. Still, he remained awake, because something beautiful was unfolding before him. Solace hovered nearby, still flickering, still fragile, but surrounded now by others. They came not in fleets or thunder, but like sparks caught in the wind, drifting over the horizon in clusters of light. They emerged from fissures in the ground, from the caves, from the skies where the magnetic clouds had once screamed. Shapes half seen, half felt echoes made whole again. Elias didn't know how many there were. Dozens? Hundreds? He had no way of counting, but they came with reverence. They circled Solace and knelt, or did the emotional equivalent of kneeling in unison. And then, slowly, they turned toward him. He didn't understand their language. He didn't need to, he felt. It grief, yes, for all that had been lost. For centuries of silence. For songs smothered in their throats. But also gratitude, deep and endless, like an ocean that had waited forever to touch shore. And then something more profound than even gratitude. Love, not romantic, not even personal, but species deep. The love one soul feels for another who reaches across darkness and says, "You're not forgotten. I see you." Solace approached, kneeling beside him, light trembling like tears. Their hand touched his chest above the fractured seals and burned flesh, and they gave him one final gift, a memory not his own, theirs, a moment from long ago, when Solace was young, drifting through clouds made of song, carried by the shared laughter of a people who had never known cruelty. That sensation flooded him. It wrapped him in warmth, in the kind of peace that asked for nothing and offered everything. It was their way of saying goodbye. "I wish," Elias whispered, voice thin and cracked. "I could have told her." Solace understood. A tendril of light reached into the shattered holoframe still clutched in his fingers. Naomi's image flickered. Lila's smile glowed for just a second longer, and then Solace remembered them. Stored them, held them so they would not be lost so he would not die forgotten. A soft hum spread across the clearing as the other beings joined together, forming a ring around him. Their lights pulsed in unison, creating a sound so hauntingly beautiful that Elias wept without understanding why. The wind carried it across the valley, a lullaby for a warrior who never sought war, for a man who had come to die, but instead became a beginning. The last thing he saw was the sky blue now, impossibly tender and vast, and then he closed his eyes. The ship arrived weeks later. A retrieval vessel sent from a distant outpost once comes reconnected. They found the wreckage, the ruins, the tower collapsed like a dead god, but no body, no corpse. Only an empty field where strange bioluminescent patterns pulsed across the ground in circles. A place that hummed with something ancient and gentle. They searched, cataloged, debated. They didn't understand, but above them, orbiting silently, was a new satellite, small, artificial, untraceable in origin. Played one message in an endless loop. A voice tired, trembling, full of love. For Lila, who gave me a cape. Naomi, who carried my pain. And for those who speak not with words, but with light, I saw them, and I stayed. The signal continued to play, even after Earth dismissed Dig Online as sealed, archived, irrelevant, but some listened. Some wondered, and some felt a spark stir in their chest and ache they couldn't name. The kind of ache that makes people reach for stars. And far below, in a valley of glass and wind, Solace stood among their reborn kin, watching the sky. They remembered the human not for his strength, not for his courage, but for his refusal to forget. And in every song they sang from that day forward, his name was written in light,